going to be done, it helps just to see some of these things. Let me open up my project. There it is. That was my example one, and then this is the one we were working on. Okay. So one question that came up was, how do we do something like a label? Okay, like how do we build this from scratch? I will provide you with this label, the PSD for this, and then you can modify it as you need. But if you want something different, if you're going with a different label, setup, whatever, then you'll obviously need to create your own. If you're not comfortable creating your own, then don't. If you're not comfortable with Photoshop or Illustrator to the point where you could create your own, don't do it. Your product will look horrible if you don't have the proper detail inside the label. If you look at any labels for anything, so skin lotion, they're not just like text. There's actual pictures that go into it. There's a whole design to it. In our design classes, there's whole projects that are based off of just creating designing labels for things, okay? So if you're not comfortable doing that, then don't. It can't be just, I'm going to throw the word lotion on there and that's good enough. It's not good enough, okay? So just use mine. And if you're using mine, obviously you have to use a product that's at least similar shaped to mine. If you are going to use your own, every label that you create has to be a square image, okay? So when you go to Photoshop or when you go to Illustrator, wherever you want to create this, you make a new document, and our size that we want to make this document is 4096 pixels by 4096 pixels. It has to be RGB because we're using this on the computer screen. And the resolution doesn't matter. This could be that number and it doesn't matter, okay? Create. Once you have this, now it's simply a matter of creating what you want the label to look like. You have to keep in mind the proportions of your item when you're creating the label. So if I were to create a piece of text, and just for purposes of this, I'll just put lotion, okay? So let's say that I have this text that says lotion, and I make it huge like this, and I do something like that. And then I want my label to spread around the entire bottle. I can't do it like that, because that would spread the word lotion around the entire bottle. If I had a bottle that was like shorter and fatter, it could work. Like if you ever seen any like little tubs of cream, it could work, not perfect. If I had something that was skinny and narrow, this definitely wouldn't work, because I would basically just see part of the T and part of the I, okay? Because of how it's going to spread it all the way around. When you look at these things, check that. Look at what an actual label would look like unfolded. This is what a label for this product looks like unfolded. This is what this one looks like unfolded, okay? Meaning that this is, if you took the cylinder and you cut it and you laid it out, that's what it would look like. This bacteria wipe here, you can see the label for this. It goes all the way around, all the way like that, okay? Now you don't need to recreate, if you're doing something like this, you don't need to recreate this kind of thing. You can grab that from the internet. There's lots of free resources for those. But if I'm building this, I need to keep that in mind. And my texture for this, if I peel this off, would essentially be that. That's my label, okay? Now because this has to be in a square image, I would have blank space here and blank space there in my image. That's fine. But it has to be square in order for the thing to lay out correctly. Now the question is, will this just stick right back on? And it will. Awesome. Cool. Okay, so once you have the document, the next step is simply laying it out. You cannot grab somebody else's artwork and use their artwork in your image, because it's their stuff. We talked about that before, about taking somebody else's artwork. Now there's nothing wrong with you taking For a student assignment, just taking the design concepts and rebuilding those things, that's fine. So if you like the way that this line work is here, I can replicate that line work. I can replicate how the text is laid out. But what I don't want to do is just copy this image, paste it in here, and then say this is my texture, because that's not my texture. Okay, I can't just do that. Because no company is going to pay you to steal somebody else's textures and use them into your own. All right? So what I can do, like I said, is use as far as layout goes, as far as any of those stuff. So this is, I'm imagining this kind of thing to be something like that. So this label looks like it would probably be something that would be just in the front of the bottle and then something that would be in the back of the bottle. So not anything that's actually like wrapped around the bottle like the lotion was here. So you can see how there's basically just a label right here. And then if we turn around to the back, there's another label right there. That's how that label would be set up, front and back. So something like this, I could use as simply just placement, okay, of where I'm going to put something. And then I could type my own stuff here. Skin moisturizing. And then I could shrink it down. I could pick a font. If you went to that Steve Saval thing, do you remember what he said about fonts? Did anyone go to it? Jake was there, right? What did he say about fonts? Exactly. Use the same font but different weights. And if you look at this label, it's the same font but different weights, right? The only thing that's different is this, because that's their logo, okay? So, oops. Same font, different weights, so pick a font and then go from there, okay? So this part, I'm not going to go over extensively in detail. It's simply a matter of just drawing out what you want that label to look like, okay? So if you want shapes, you draw shapes. You can use the pen tool, using shapes, and then you can create stuff like so, like so, like that, like that. I'm not spending a lot of time doing that, but there's a shape. And there's my fill. Okay, so you could definitely do that. If you wanted to use Illustrator, Illustrator is the same way. Illustrator does not deal in pixels though. It deals in points, picas, inches, and it says pixels, but it's not really pixels because it's vector. But you still want this to be square, so if it makes you feel better, or makes it easier for you just to translate the two, you can definitely just set it to 4096 by 4096. And is it thinking? What's it doing? Yes, it's thinking. My Illustrator is set up to do that, so I'm going to go to View, Hide Transparency Grid. And then this box is my texture. Okay, so the same stuff I would do inside Photoshop is the same stuff I would do inside here. If I open up my texture that I made, I did it in Illustrator because I like Illustrator's ability to line things up. So when I go like this and I create a shape, and then I say I want to have another one, as I duplicate this, you see those guides that pop up? Photoshop doesn't have that. Okay, so it makes it very easy for me to line these things up, especially since most of this is a vector image. It's easier for me to do that in Illustrator. When I save it in Photoshop or I save it in Illustrator, Cinema does not like Photoshop PSDs. It can read them, it just doesn't like them. It can't read Illustrator files for textures. So in either event, we want to export or save as, and save it as a format that it can read. So the most common format for something like this is a Targa or a TIFF. So you can save it as either one of those formats, and that would be acceptable. Okay, so I would save this as a Targa. I would save this as my label. I'm just going to put number 2 here. And then this will come up and say RGB, screen is fine, and then OK. Yes. Oops. Now, there is a big difference in one thing inside of each of these. So, oops, I don't want to delete that. Why would I do that? Oh, I opened up the image. I did not open up the, there it is. So inside here, If I were to not have a background color inside Illustrator and I saved this out, Illustrator automatically crops my document to fit just the artwork, okay? So I had to create a background rectangle like that and move it all the way to the back of the document so that I would have the document still come out square, okay? So that was a difference that Photoshop and Illustrator don't do. Photoshop, whatever I save this as, it saves it as that same resolution, okay? I also have somewhere in my YouTube playlist, there is a video of me actually making a label. If you want to find that, you definitely could. I really want you to focus more on the cinema stuff versus spending, let's say, 2 or 3 classes building a label. This isn't a Photoshop class, this isn't a design class, okay?
So you would mainly want us like just find a label online and just focus on the stuff in cinema, right?
Yes, but if you're going to find a label online, you have to rebuild it. So you're not redesigning it if you find one online. Like if I want to build, like in yours, you have a lotion, right? Okay. Soap, okay, well, it's the same thing. So if you're doing this, then you would basically just rebuild that label because the label that I'm providing doesn't work for what your stuff is set up as. Okay, so you'd have to rebuild the label inside there for that to work, right? Because if I just go out here and I take one of these,
In Photoshop or cinema?
and you'd have to create the label in Photoshop or create the label in Illustrator. You would need to do that, yes. If you're modeling your own stuff, yes. If you're modeling the stuff that matches this, if you're modeling these things, I'm providing those labels. So then you don't have to focus on that. So if you don't want to build labels, do these items. If you do want to build labels, then you would do your own. Yes, sir.
Even though mine sort of has a label, being this sort of beige part,
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually going to be adding my own touches to it, like a picture or some words.
Right, it has to have a label. That's part of the assignment here is that we want it to have a label. Because you have to see how you would do something like this because part of what you would work on in cinema is product type items. Now, Cameron had a something that wasn't symmetrical, okay? So all the bottle stuff there was pretty symmetrical. But you're not going to find symmetry everywhere. So sometimes you'll find items like this, where you have this nozzle sticking out, or you'll have something like this, where you have this nozzle sticking out there. Okay? So there's lots of different ways that you can build those kinds of things. So just to kind of cover, at least 1 or 2 methods. Where's my stuff? Down here. There it is. Okay. I'm going to create one of those things. All right, so if I'm creating, let's say, we'll start off with this one because this one's easier to start off with. Oh, I just want to view the image. Why won't they let me do that? Okay, so something like this. If we break it down into what the shapes are, it's basically that same revolved or lathe shape, and then it has a little piece coming off of it. You can see a direct link right here where that thing is like touching. So if it was something like that, I would go into my view, I would go to my spline tool, and I would draw that out. So ignore this cap for a second. Oops. And it kind of comes in a little bit, and then it tucks up. And then it goes to about there. So now I'm just going to make sure all my points are snapped to the correct spot. So I have my snap on, and I'm just moving it. This point is the only one that's going to be visibly where the center is, so I need to make sure that that's snapped right to that midpoint. Then I can turn my snap off and then just adjust these other points. If you accidentally made one of these points without handles and you want handles, or vice versa, you can right-click on the point and make it either hard, where there's no handles, or right-click and make it soft, and then there are handles. And now you can, if I can click it, come on. Why aren't you letting me grab that? All right, it's just being stupid now. I have something clicked maybe, I don't know. This modeling object, nothing there. Still rotate it. I'm not sure why it's not letting me grab the handles. I don't have soft select on. No. I don't know. I must have something clicked. Anyway. All right, so once I have that, then I can drop this into a lathe. So I hold Alt, click on it, and now it's been lathed all the way around. I want to look for anywhere it looks like there's a poke. So if you look right here, there's a poke. The points are going in. I need to not have the points go in because that doesn't work. So I'm going to go back to my spline. I'm going to go back to the points for the spline. And I'm just going to make sure that it's flat at the top. Okay, and you can kind of see that if you look at, I can turn the lathe off. If you look at how this is coming in, as it comes in like this, that dip is going to go all the way around. As it flattens out, it will not do that. Okay, and you could even turn the lathe on and look at it here until you see it. Because you can go too far that way or too far the other way. All right, so that's pretty close. That's really far away, actually, from the original. Let me grab my selection tool. Let me grab this. I'm going to turn the lathe off. I just went too far in on these points, so I just need to move them out. And it's not letting me select the handles for whatever reason, but you can see I can still rotate the handles, and I can still like scale them in. There we go. So we'll pretend that that's good enough for now. We'll turn this back on. Oops. There we go. So that'll be good enough for our little demo. Now, to get this little nozzle part, that looks like it's just a cylinder. So for that, I would literally just create a cylinder and then just start shaping it into that nozzle. Keep everything lined up with that view. Oops, wrong program. There we go. So I don't want to like rotate it on this angle here, even though I may want that at the end. I want to keep it perfectly lined up with my X, Y, and Z directions because it just makes your life a lot easier. All right, so I'm going to turn off my caps on this. I don't want any caps because I'm going to hit C, and then I'm going to grab the edges and then extrude the edges out, and then move it down, and then rotate it. So that looks pretty close to what that is. Maybe I can move it a little bit further out. Okay, now I can't leave it there because there's no thickness to this, so what I would do afterwards, I would either grab all the faces and just extrude it, or using that cloth surface I showed last time, if I just drop it into the cloth surface and I add a little bit of thickness, that's too much thickness, 0.25, there we go, that works. Okay, I could even, if I smooth this out, it's going to be like really soft. I don't want that. So I actually may not use the cloth surface because I want to extrude so that I can get a bevel on all these faces. So I'm just grabbing all the faces, extruding a little bit, making sure that create caps is on here. And then I can go through and add some bevels to these areas. There's also an area right there. All right, so that's how I would create a cap just like that. Now if I'm creating something where it would actually be part of it, so it's actually like welded into it, I'm just going to duplicate this and use that same basic shape. I'm going to hit C on it, and then I'm going to grab the faces. And then what I'm going to do is just grab each one of these, and this is going to be where that's going to pull out of. Okay, so that's where, nope, I missed one more row. Okay. I think I went too far this way. All right, that looks good. Okay, so now I'm just going to extrude and then pull this out. That's actually from the bottom. That wouldn't make sense at all. There we go. So I'm going to extrude this. I'm going to move it out. I'm going to scale it down. Maybe I'll scale it a bit that way too. I could extrude it again from here, and then rotate it, and then move that down, and then scale it. And then to create the opening, because that's not that one, that would be this type. To create the little opening that would be there, I could extrude this inner, so it goes like that, and then just do a regular extrude and push it in. Now because before I turned on create caps, I have to uncheck it so that it doesn't cap off the top of that. And then I could go through after this and then start adding some bevels into these spots. So bevel here, maybe a bevel there if it lets me select. It's not letting me select because I have a cap that's on the inside of this. When I extruded it initially, it created a cap, so I have to just make sure I delete that. There it is. And then probably on the inside of this also. And the reason I knew that is because as I was selecting some of the stuff, it just wasn't allowing me to grab the loop all the way around it. So I'm being very careful. I don't select faces I don't want to get rid of. Whoa. All right, that works. Now I can go back to my edges, and now I should be able to double click, yes, and then double click this, and this. Drop a little bevel on there. And then if I need to, I could then smooth that out. And now I would have something that is actually like coming out of the surface versus something like that, which is just, you know, a second part. Now this process can be a lot simpler too if you go to your original shape and you start to customize what that shape looks like. So if you look at all the divisions that are here, the less divisions I have, the easier it is to select faces. So if I click on that lathe, I go to the object, I can take my subdivisions down to, let's say, 8, so I have less divisions going around it. I can go to my spline and change this angle up. Let me turn on my divisions here so we can see it. And you'll see how that helps get rid of the divisions going upwards. And then I could take that, I'm going to hit C on this now. And now it'll be much simpler for me just to grab these two faces and then extrude out. And then what you're going to see is that the shape itself will actually be a bit smoother because there's less divisions. So I'm going to pull that back, maybe push this down some. Do that, a little bit of rotate. Don't be afraid to experiment if you're doing any shapes like this. A lot of it is just getting used to, like, where do I push, where do I pull, where do I extrude, where do I bevel, how many divisions do I need. And once you know that for a couple shapes, it'll apply basically to every shape that you use. So that's pretty good. Little bevel. Maybe one less division in those. And smaller size because that one kind of freaked out. Cool. All right, now this one looks pretty ugly because it's so blocky. So then I'll just put that inside a subdivision. And then I will turn off my wireframe. So you can see these are two shapes I created pretty much the same way. Where's my pivot? There it is. And you'll see that there are some slight differences in them. One of them, if you look at it, this one has a pretty obvious transition from where this shape is to where that shape is. This one blends it a bit more than the other one does. I don't really care for that. I think I'm going to eliminate the bevel here. Dissolve and dissolve. Okay, I didn't care for that bevel. So now that'll be nice and smooth. Okay, so you can really customize the shapes of your items if you have control over where you have divisions, where you have points. And just playing with different things, you'll find, you know, just different methods of creating something. Okay, those are typically the two styles that you would have. If you had the little flare on the back of this one, you would do, you could do the same thing, or you could even build that as a separate piece. So that top cap would just be literally a separate piece you just set on top. If it is something like this where you do see the insides, you probably also want to model the insides of it. That's why I like these ones that I did, because you can't really see the inside. There's no liquid inside of it. So it works out pretty good. Especially if you look at what makes that look so realistic. Not necessarily that one, like this one here. You can see all the mechanics of this. You can see a spring, you can see some pieces of plastic, you can see the different sizes of hosing that's inside that.
Do we have to create a liquid?
If you see into it, yes. Right? So if I was doing this glass one, I'd want to have the liquid inside there. It's not difficult to do, but it's definitely more time consuming. I will show that another day, not today. Okay, so now you can see how you could make a label if you need to make a label, and now you can see how you can do different tops that would be on top of there. If you had a different shaped bottle, the same process would apply. Let me grab this bottle. That bottle works. So I just swiped one of my bottles here. You could also grab some of your faces for your bottle like this. And you may have a bottle that is not the same shape all the way around. There's too many divisions here, and that's why it's doing that. I don't want to select everything. Oops. So in some cases, I may want to do something like that, and then make the whole thing bigger. Actually, I can try to scale it out. There we go. So if for some reason my bottle was kind of like this flasky kind of shape, I could definitely do something like that. Let me put my pivot up here. If I had any indents in it, then I could also grab that too, just grabbing these. Like on these lotion bottles, there's usually a indent like this. and then another indent inward. And then when that gets smoothed out, then you'll get this kind of like rim that would go around it. And then my label would just be inside that area. So again, another way that you could create another item. Okay, keeping in mind that if you are doing something that has any bottle, they typically have rounded lids, so make sure that that cap or whatever it is still rounded, because it wouldn't make sense for it to be like oblong. There's very few of those. Yeah, and don't go for something like that, especially for your first go at a product. That's way too much stuff going on. Keep it simple. Keep it simple until you get a little bit more experience, then you can start playing with other stuff. Cool. Questions?